What's those ahkam?
نعم.
Ready?
نعم.
Okay, we should have. نبدأ. الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. So today inshallah ta'ala we'll be restarting the lesson that we normally have on Fridays at this time, and normally we'll be discussing the book Mukhtasar Sahih Bukhari by Zabidi rahimahullah ta'ala. But today inshallah ta'ala we'll somewhat move away from that topic and or replace it today with a different topic. And the matter that we'll be discussing is a matter that for the past few years that we have experienced, and this matter, even though what we're discussing is somewhat a week old, but something to be discussed and at least noted. So if it was to reoccur in the future, then we have something as a reference regarding what can be said about this particular topic. So the topic that we wish to cover today, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, is a matter regarding, as we have found last Friday, that most of the Muslims that we experience to an event which is Yawm al-Eid, but also Yawm al-Eid coincide with Yawm al-Jumu'ah. So if we were to find a day, we found a jam, ijtima, that Eid day coincide with a Friday, Yawm al-Jumu'ah, then what to be done regarding Salatul Eid and also Salatul Jumu'ah, and also some of those things that attach to this particular this particular matter. So we hope inshallah ta'ala that to mention what have been mentioned or discussed on this topic regarding the hadith wal athar and also the aqwal of the ulama on this particular topic. So as we know, as we said, for the past few years, at times we have experienced where Eid Salah have coincided with Yawm al-Jumu'ah. So you have a discussion that is not something which is new, but something been discussed by the ulama regarding what to be done in such a case as regarding Salatul Eid and also Salatul Jumu'ah. So you find that different aqwal, different narration on this matter, and because the Prophet Islam, or we have a hadith that relates to this matter, we'll be using the hadith as a premise, and also the aqwal of the Salaf from the Sahaba as to what they did, and also what have come to us by with the aqwal of the ulama. So on these matters, these topics that you might find that in certain topics that some of the mashaykh or some of the ulama have discussed them as a topic, independent topic, taken from what is normally mentioned in the books of fiqh, but so looking at those independent topic-led discussion, it serves more. It's more useful as at times they go into more detail. So those in matters that are discussed as a topic, that you find that the approach may be more detailed, where they'll discuss things in more detail, so it becomes more useful compared to what sometimes is mentioned in the books of fiqh that give us some general discussion on the topic. So as we mentioned, the topic to be discussed, you find some of the contemporaries have discussed this matter and covered this topic. And so of this matter that it relates to, as we said, the thing to consider, if Yawm al-Jumu'ah coincide with Salatul Eid on the same day, we have Eid, and then later on we have Salatul Jumu'ah, what to be done in such a scenario. Also within that scenario, that if, as we'll discuss, different things that are put forward regarding, is the person who prayed Salatul Eid, is upon them to pray Salatul Jumu'ah, or the person who prays Salatul Jumu'ah is the person somewhat as that concession that they are allowed to miss Salatul Eid or Salatul Jumu'ah. Also the person who may have this view is the person allowed to pray Salatul Dhuhr if they miss Salat al-Jumu'ah. So these are those things that are mentioned in this particular discussion. So this inshallah ta'ala, that the method that we'll be approaching is that we'll mention the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ regarding what have been mentioned regarding this particular discussion or masala, and also what have been mentioned from the Sahaba, and also third, the aqwal of the ulama, and then fourth, what is the qawl rajih, and also critiquing the hadith and the athar that discuss this particular matter. So we have some ahadith marfu'ah. So we have some ahadith al-marfu'ah that go back to the Prophet ﷺ regarding this matter. Also we have some riwayat al-mawqufa, some also narration upon the Sahaba on this particular matter. So that would be the main or the premise of this discussion. Then we'll mention aqwal of the ulama. So as we mentioned, a hadith upon the Prophet ﷺ on this matter. So you'll find that the hadith on this matter, we'll find that as we'll mention in detail, we have the hadith of Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan that he asked Zayd ibn Arqam on this matter. Also second, we have the hadith of Abu Hurairah anhu on this matter. We have the hadith of Ibn Umar on this particular topic. Also, we have what is mentioned by Umar ibn Abdul Aziz on this particular topic, and also the hadith of Nu'man ibn Bashir. So these are, and also, these are of the hadith on this topic, and also we have different athar that is mentioned on this discussion. So starting with a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ on this matter. So as for the hadith, so we have several hadith regarding the topic with the Prophet Islam have mentioned or discussed this matter and given us some guidelines on this matter. So we start with those who said mention the hadith, and also takhrij of the hadith, and also what's the hukum on these hadiths. So that will be the approach that will be followed. So as for these hadith regarding the topic that we are covering, which is if Yawmul Jumu'ah and Salatul Eid, or Eid, Salat and Yawmul Jumu'ah was to coincide, fall on the same day, what is to be done? What to be done? So on this matter, of those hadith from the Prophet ﷺ, they mentioned hadith al-awwal, and Iyas ibn Abi Ramla al-Shami قال شهدت معاوية ibn Abi Sufyan وهو يسأل زيد ibn Arqam قال شهدت مع رسول الله عليه السلام عيدين اجتماع في يوم. So he mentioned that Iyas ibn Abi Ramla al-Shami, that he mentioned that he was present, he witnessed Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan radiyallahu anhu, that he said that he asked Zayd ibn Arqam regarding a matter, where he mentioned that, did you witness, meaning that Muawiyah asking Zayd ibn Arqam, did you witness with the Prophet ﷺ that the combining of Eid, these two Eid on the same day, Eid and Jumu'ah. He meant by Eidain, Eid, Salat and Jumu'ah. فقال نعم. So Zayd ibn Arqam, he mentioned نعم, he did witness this. قال فكيف صنع. Then he asked, what was done? قال, meaning Zayd ibn Arqam, he responded by saying قال صلى Eid, that we prayed, Eid was prayed, ثم رخص في الجمعة, that Eid Salat was prayed, but then there was some concession given regarding, or some leniency given regarding Salatul Jumu'ah. فقال, when the Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned, or Zayd ibn Arqam said that this was what was done, then he mentioned قال, then the Prophet ﷺ have said من شاء أن يصلي فصلي, that the one who wishes, he prays. Meaning concerning a person that he was giving a somewhat permission for those who pray Salatul Eid not to pray Salatul Jumu'ah. So the Prophet ﷺ mentioned من شاء أن يصلي فصلي, that a person who wishes to pray Salatul Jumu'ah, he has not, it is something which is optional if he wishes. من شاء. So can someone that so give that a permission or give a concession that if the person wishes to do so, he can do so, and also it will mean if the person wishes not to do so, they don't have to. So that's concerning the first hadith, the hadith that they discuss, that by way of this hadith can be found أخرجه Abu Dawud at-Tayalisi. So you have Abu Dawud at-Tayalisi, that is not Abu Dawud as-Sijistani, Sahib as-Sunnah, by way of Ashabu Sunan al-Arba. So he mentioned hadith in the Abu Dawud at-Tayalisi in his Musnad. The hadith also, that hadith is narrated by Ibn Abi Shayba fi Musannaf, Ahmad in his Musnad, Bukhari in his book At-Tarikh Al-Khabir, also Ad-Darimi in his Sunan or Jami', Abu Dawood As-Sijistani in his Sunan, Nasa'i in Mujtaba wal Kabir. So Nasa'i rahimahullah, he mentioned the hadith in both his Saghir and also his collection of As-Sunan Al-Kabir. Ibn Majah and others. Also and others who have narrated that. So you have Al-Mustadrak lil-Hakim. Also they mentioned Bayhaqi in Al-Kabir was-Saghir wal-Ma'rifat al-Sunan wal-Athar. So Bayhaqi rahimahullah have many books in hadith or several books in hadith. So he mentioned in several of those books. He mentioned in several of his works and others who have narrated this hadith or collected this hadith. So again, that's the hadith that they discussed regarding the Prophet Islam. Kind of someone mentioned that if the person wishes to pray Jumu'ah, is allowed, and if he wishes not to, that's the meaning of the hadith. He can miss out on Jumu'ah. As for that hadith, between the ulama, what they discussed regarding this particular hadith, that the hadith are different, that they mentioned that Al-Hakim rahimahullah in his book Al-Mustadrak قال هذا حديث صحيح إسناد صحيح الإسناد. So he mentioned Al-Hakim rahimahullah that his position the hadith is sahih, and I mentioned isnad, the isnad is sahih, walam yukharrajahu, and that Bukhari and Muslim did not transmit it or collected this hadith. وله شاهد على له شاهد على شرط المسلم, and the hadith also have a shahid of another narration that hadith that is according to the condition of Imam Muslim rahimahullah ta'ala. But overall, in summary, that of those who authenticate the hadith of Iyas ibn Abi Ramla Ashami, that regarding Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan rahimahullah anhu asking Zayd ibn Arkan regarding what to be done, where they kind of somewhat give the meaning, the Prophet give the meaning that if you wish you pray Eid, if you wish you can pray Jumu'ah, and if you wish you can miss Jumu'ah. Clear? As for the hadith, they mentioned, so said Hakim, as for the hadith is authentic. Then also An-Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala in his book Al-Majmu' Sharh Mu'adhab, that he mentioned Isnaduhu Jayd. Isnaduhu Jayd. So now rahimahullah, second of those who all the hadith to be Jayd, that Jayd mean hadith is maqbool. They say Jayd, hadith between above Hasan and below Sahih. According to all those who discuss, but hadith Jayd, that hadith is authentic. Also again now rahimahullah ta'ala in his book Khulasatul Ahkam, he has another book Khulasatul Ahkam, he mentioned Isnaduhu Hasan. So he mentioned Isnaduhu Hasan. So now rahimahullah have to mention a hadith overall, it is maqbool. The hadith is maqbool. Then as for the discussion now, are they correct regarding what the judgment that they are passed on the hadith or grading that An-Nawawi and Al-Hakim have given regarding that hadith. They mentioned that this matter is somewhat challenged in the field according to the Qawaid al-Hadithiyah, where I mentioned that as for Al-Hakim and An-Nawawi rahimahullah, all the hadith to be authentic, that I mentioned fihi nazar, that their ruling fihi nazar, that there's something to be looked into further. Meaning concerned to know what they're saying is, they mentioned reason, Iyas ibn Abi Ramla Ashami majhul, fihi jahala, someone who's not known. So they said jahala, that Abu Bukhari rahimahullah, when I mentioned jahala, Bukhari rahimahullah, that he mentioned something of this narrator, Iyas ibn Abi Ramla Ashami, قال في كتاب تاريخ الخبير قال, that when he mentioned this particular person, that they mentioned that with this person, there's no mention of any jar or ta'dil. So a person like that, so they mention him, but there's nothing mentioned by way of the ulama regarding regarding the person concerning ta'dil, kind of somewhat giving the person some credibility, or jar or anything that is disparaging said about him. So nothing that is encouraged or anything that is praiseworthy, plausible, said about the person, nor anything which is negative said about him. So as one of the ulama, they said person be majhul, because you cannot make a judgment on him. You know of him, but you don't know is he a person that is trustworthy, credible enough to take his narration, or there's nothing that has been said about him that is disparaging. So they said that person is majhul, because you can't take a position on him. So based upon that, so Ibn Hajar rahimahullah mentioned that is majhul. Not much can be said about this person regarding. Then I mentioned Baqiyatul Rijal al-Hadith Thiqat. So they mentioned that this hadith, so you have that hadith is question based upon this. Then you have of the ulama Ibn Khuzaymah, I've said regarding this hadith, in Sahal Khabar, if this hadith is considered to be authentic, فإني لا أعرف إياس ibn Abi Ramla بأدالة ولا جر. That he mentioned that if we would say the hadith is authentic, but this person, one the narrator, Iyas ibn Abi Ramla, I don't know anything that is said about him, whether it's for or against him. So is jahala, is unknown. That's a reason to all a hadith to be da'if. That's a reason to all a hadith to be said to be da'if. Also Ibn Qattan, he has a book called Bayan al-Wahm wal-Iham, where he went up Abu al-Haq al-Ishbili as these books that he discussed, Kutub al-Ahkam al-Hadith. So he went to one of them and somewhat discussed the hadith, those some of those hadith where he mentioned that. So Ibn Qattan have a book that is called Bayan al-Wahm wal-Iham, where he mentioned this person, وهو من رواية, this hadith is from the narration of Iyas ibn Abi Ramla. قال ابن منذر لا يثبت هذا. So Ibn Munzir, or the person that the hadith is not authentic, لا يثبت يعني هذا حديث فإن إياسا مجعول, because Iyas is maj'ul. So overall, the criticism of that hadith is based upon Iyas ibn Abi Ramla, and he's maj'ul. So that's a reason to all the hadith to be da'if. Then I mentioned that Ibn Hajar rahimahullah in his book At-Talkhis al-Habir, where he mentioned Sahahu, that of those of authentic hadith, Ali ibn Madini, وقال ابن منذر هذا حديث لا يثبت. So again, that discussion is regarding that, and I mentioned that Ibn Muqadda وإياس ibn Abi Ramla rawihi an Zayd, that the hadith is somewhat critique or criticized because of this narrator who's Iyas ibn Abi Ramla Ash-Shami. So I mentioned that overall, I mentioned the hadith is da'if. The hadith is da'if. So that's the first hadith that is mentioned. There's a second hadith on this topic. So the first hadith. So the first hadith we said, count the first hadith is by the hadith of Iyas. But on Muawiyah who asked, so the hadith of Muawiyah, but one narrator is Iyas ibn Abi Ramla, who asked, who overheard like that he heard Muawiyah saying such and such. When he asked, or Muawiyah supposed to have asked Zayd ibn Arqam regarding what occurred when Jumu'ah and Eid coincide. And the Prophet ﷺ said, if the person wish, he can choose to pray Jumu'ah or not. The second hadith Abi Hurairah radhiyallahu anhu, and Rasulullah alayhi wasallam أنه قال, the Prophet ﷺ قال قد اجتمع في يومكم هذا عيدان. The Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned that قد اجتمع, that today combine on this particular day two Eids. On this particular day, that two Eids have combined together, which is, who said what? Eid what? Jumu'ah or Eid al-Fitr or Adha. Now, but both of two Eid, Jumu'ah with one of the Eid have combined was on the same day. Then Islam mentioned, they mentioned فَمَنْ شَاءَ أَجْزَأَهُ, if who wishes أَجْزَأَهُ min al-Jumu'ah, that the one who wishes, then concerned to know that Jumu'ah is like, if he was to pray Jumu'ah, it is exempt. وَإِنَّا مُجَمِّعُونَ, as for us, مُجَمِّعُونَ, that as for us, we'll be gathering together. Mina mentioned that, no? إِنَّا مُجَمِّعُونَ, that we'll be praying Jumu'ah. So a person which he can forfeit, with the word forfeit, Jumu'ah, but the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that he would be praying Jumu'ah. Inna mujammi'un, that we will be praying Jumu'ah as they explained. So from this the Prophet mentioned فَمَنْ شَاءَ أَجْزَاهُ min al-Jumu'ah, that if he wishes Eid Salat, it is sufficient for him and is exempt from Salatul Jumu'ah. So as for that hadith, that again the hadith, that second hadith number 2, أخرجه أبو داود وابن ماجه وبزار في مسنده وابن جارود في منتقى وفي ريابي في أحكام العيدين, and others, At-Tahawi fi Mushkil al-Athar, and also Ibn Shahid and others, and Akim also in his book Al-Mustadrak, Bayhaqi fi Sunan al-Kubra or Kabir, also Ibn Abdul Bar fi his book At-Tamhid, Khatib al-Baghdadi fi Tariq al-Baghdad, and others. this hadith with isnad. So that's the second hadith. So as for no discussion regarding that this hadith, that they mentioned that in the hadith, this hadith, the isnad it have من طريق بقية ابن وليد قال حدثنا شعبة عن مغيرة ابن مغيرة ضبي عن أبي العزيز ابن رفيع عن أبي صالح عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه. That's the isnad. That's the isnad. So they mentioned that regarding that isnad, we said a person that his name is Baqi' ibn Walid. That there's a discussion as mentioned by Bazzar regarding Baqi' ibn Walid. قال لا نعلم رواه عن شعبة وأسنده إلا بقية. That the only person that narrate this hadith upon Shu'bah is Baqi'. So the hadith, they mentioned that but overall they mentioned that there's a discussion regarding Baqi' ibn Walid, that they mentioned that he's known to be one who is known for tadlis. He's known for, so in the ulama hadith they have a kind of somewhat a certain type of a narrator sometimes is referred to as modallis, because he narrating in a way of tadlis, like kind of somewhat not straightforward. So somewhat like that now, so sometimes narration is not very straightforward. Whether he actually, so he narrate the hadith in a way where you're unclear, he needs to verify whether he actually heard the hadith or not from the person that he's narrating from. Or sometimes he may change the person name, or may skip a person. So you might hear from a particular person, but he might skip that person by not mentioning because that person is criticized. So, and then kind of somewhat skip to the next person behind or after. So a tadlis is something which is, so Baqi' ibn Walid is known for tadlis and also known for tadlis. So a taswiyah, which is one of the ones that are highly criticized. So Baqi' ibn Walid is known for a tadlis, in this case, even though he mentioned that as an isnad. So based upon this you find that the ulama are mentioned this hadith. فقال ابن عبد البر رحمه الله تعالى that they have alati إنما رأوا عنه بقي بن وليد وليس بشيء في شعبة أصلا. So they mentioned that Baqi' ibn Walid is narration upon Shu'bah. You see it as it of nothing, not much. It amounts to not much. Plus also Baqi' is a modallis. But even though in this nisad I mentioned that, so of the case of modallis, that when he narrates, that you have to look and find, is there other narrations where he actually use word that he heard directly from the person. So he used the word an in most cases. But in this case he mentioned that من طريق بقي بن وليد قال حدثنا شعبة, giving it that show that he did hear from him. But in the case of tadlis at taswiyah, not just only Walid need to use words that are clear that he heard from Shu'bah, but for the entire isnad. For everyone the isnad, they have to someone actually use words that is clear that they heard from the person directly. By saying حدثنا سمعت and the likes. That's ilmul hadith in some details. Clear? We won't go into that bit, but overall of the discussion regarding Baqi' ibn Walid, that is a modallis. And also they mentioned with the ulama, they mentioned that قال Khattabi. So Khattabi rahimahullah have a book called Ma'alim al-Sunan, that of the early ones to explain Sahih Bukhari, and of the early ones to explain Sahih Bukhari and Sunan Abi Dawud. So of the early ones to Khattabi, that in his book Ma'alim al-Sunan, that he says في إسناده مقال. Khattabi, he mentions, so criticizing this isnad. Then also An-Nawawi also mentioned in the book Al-Majmu' isnaduhu da'if. So we have Khattabi, An-Nawawi, all hadith to be da'if. Also Ibn Malakkin in his book Badr al-Munir by Ibn Malakkin قال قلت فقد صرح البقيع بالتحديد فقال حدثنا شعبة لكن لا ينفعه ذلك. So he said even though Baqi' ibn Walid, he did say that he heard directly from Shu'bah, but he said no, that doesn't benefit him. فإنه معروف بتدليس التسوية, because he's well known for those who do this type of tadlis. Huh? Hey, we'll come to the conclusion. Hey, so could he drop someone that normally a person who's weak? Nam says can solve one of them more like the test way of tadlis. It's not one of the most approved, one of the least approved. And sometimes do it purposely. You understand? So sometimes you might have the person that is narrating upon is criticized. You understand? So he doesn't want, so he wants to go around him. So either time he may mention him, but not by the name that he's well known for. Or he may skip him and just go to the next person. You understand? But so you find that, so that's why kind of somewhat it is something which they look down upon. They look down upon this approach. But in this case, he mentioned Shoba, he heard from Shoba, but because he's known for this practice, then not only does he have to say, I heard from the person directly in front of me that I would narrate from, but also everyone in the isnad, from the start through to the end. Because it could be still have problems within the isnad. But we said that's more matter regarding ilm al-hadith. So overall, that they kind of somewhat, they more of the opinion that this hadith, they mention it is daif. This hadith, it is daif. So that's the second hadith in a nutshell. In summary, that hadith also is considered to be daif. So that's the hadith of Abu Hurairah. Where in this case the hadith of the Prophet that gives some concession regarding a person missing Jumu'ah. The third hadith, hadith al-thalith, regarding this particular discussion, that an Ibn Umar, the third hadith is an Ibn Umar. So I mentioned that قال اجتمع عيدان على عهد رسول الله عليه السلام فصلى بالناس ثم قال. So I mentioned that Ibn Umar, the hadith of Ibn Umar عنهما, that he mentioned that both Eid were coincide during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. Then he mentioned فصلى بالناس. Then the Prophet ﷺ, he prayed with the people. ثم قال. Then he mentioned من شاء أن يأتي الجمعة فليأتي بها. That he mentioned that the one who wished to come for Jumu'ah, then he can come. ومن شاء أن يتخلف فليتخلف. And the one who wished to not attend, he can do so. The one who wished to miss it, he can miss it. That hadith is sariyah. So the Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned من شاء أن يأتي الجمعة فليأتي بها. That the one who wished to attend Jumu'ah, because that day both Eid, Jumu'ah and Eid coincide. So the Prophet ﷺ have mentioned the one who wished to attend Jumu'ah, if he wish, he can do so, and the one who wish not to, he can leave it, he can miss it. They mentioned that as for this hadith, it is in the Ibn Majah, and a different turuq of this hadith, but they mentioned regarding concerning hadith in the Ibn Majah, and also Ibn Jawzi, Tahqiq, Masahil, Al-Khilaf, and also Ibn Jawzi, rahimahullah ta'ala, Abu Bakr, Ilal Mutanahiya. So you have a next book that he mentioned this hadith, where the hadith mentioned min isnad and Jubara ibn Mughallis and Mindal ibn Ali and Abdul Aziz ibn Umar and Nafi' and Ibn Umar al-Hadith. That's the isnad. They said after this particular hadith, they have one of the first narrator, which is Jubara ibn Mughassil, or Mughassil, that they mentioned that, as for him, that that they mentioned regarding concerning Ibn Jawzi rahimahullah, he mentioned هذا لا يصح. Ibn Jawzi rahimahullah, or the hadith is not authentic, and he mentioned of the reason, he mentioned concerning that of the narrator Mindal ibn Ali. Mindal ibn Ali, one of the narrators in this isnad mentioned daif jiddan. He's a very weak narrator. أما جبارة فليس بشيء. Second reason, Jubbara ibn Mughallis also mentioned فليس بشيء, is nothing. So that's a critique of a second narrator. This is the third hadith. This is the third hadith. Was said in that isnad of this third hadith. This third hadith would have said the third hadith, the hadith of Ibn Umar, where the Prophet mentioned that that during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, but you have a day where Eid, both Eid coincide on the same day. Then the Prophet ﷺ, when they prayed, he told the people that man sha, the one who wish, he can attend Jumu'ah, and the one who wishes, he can miss Jumu'ah. So said in this isnad, the hadith in the Ibn Majah. Both said in the and they're similar, but the difference said different Sahabi. So you have all these are different Sahaba, but the meaning are somewhat similar. But you have different Sahaba. So this hadith of Ibn Umar, that was said is daif jiddan, because of those narrators that we mentioned, Jubara ibn Mughallis and also Mindal ibn Ali, that their critique. That even mentioned regarding concern Jubara, فليس بشيء قال يحيى ibn Ma'in هو كذاب. Can someone mention كذاب, a person like he's a liar. قال ابن منير كان يود له حديث ويحدث به. Like can someone know he used to fabricate hadith, he used to make up hadith. So very harsh criticism against that narrator. Harsh criticism against those narrator. I mentioned it, Busiri in his book Misbah Zujaja, we mentioned هذا إسناد ضعيف. Busiri, that even he clarified the hadith is daif. We mentioned Lidaf, Jubara wa Mindal. Based upon those two narrators, Jubara and Mindal, the hadith is daif. So the hadith is daif jiddan. That's a very weak hadith. So the third hadith, which is the third hadith of Ibn Umar, that's also daif and very weak. There's another narration of the hadith of Ibn Umar, a second narration of the same hadith of Ibn Umar in the Tabarani في الكبير. قال بالإسناد قال عن ابن عمر قال اجتمع عيدان على عهد رسول الله عليه السلام يوم الفطر والجمعة. So in this hadith it mentioned that two Eids were combined together on the same day during the time of the Prophet عليه السلام يوم الفطر والجمعة. So can someone clarify which of the two Eid coincide? Fitr and Fitr's when? After Ramadan, and Jumu'ah coincide on the same day. فقال فصلى بهم رسول عليه السلام صلاة العيد. So the Prophet ﷺ, he prayed them صلاة العيد. ثم أقبل عليهم بوجهه. Then he faced the people, turned to the people and faced them. فقال, and then he said to the people while they were there, يا أيها الناس, O people, إنكم قد أصبتم خير وأجر, that you have gathered much good and reward. إننا مجمعون, and today that we'll be praying. فمن أراد, meaning concerned, we will be praying Salatul Jumu'ah. فمن أراد أن يجمع معنا, the one who wish to pray again with us, فليجمع, then he can pray, which is Jumu'ah, because they already pray Eid. So he's addressing them after Salatul Eid. So saying to them, إننا مجمعون, that we be praying Salatul Jumu'ah. فمن أراد, say live to the person's wishes, أراد. If one wishes, if one wills, يجمع معنا, then you can pray with us. فليجمع ومن أراد أن يرجع إلى أهله فليرجع, and the one who wishes to go back to his family, then he can do so. So he gave them an option in the hadith. So the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, that he gave them an option regarding that both Eid coincide. In this case, Eid al-Fitr, then after Jumu'ah, after Eid al-Fitr, he addressed the people regarding those who wish to pray with us later, Salatul Jumu'ah, you can do so. And those who wish not to, you can go back to your families. You can stay with your family. So that's all. And I mentioned that هذا إسناد ضعيف جدا. Also this isnad is very weak. This isnad is very weak. Right? I said,
maybe it might be strong because so many people are narrating basically the same thing. There might be some
as a base, as some. Not all the time. You understand? So you go back to, you understand, you might find some hadith you have many narrators. Or you understand? But it based upon the level of weakness, it may not give strength. Give strength. So I said the first thing to do is to look at each case of every Sahabi. What they have said regards to the main thing is to gather, the first step is to gather all the narration on this topic, and then go through each one on its own, each companion what they said, and also what's the grading and critique that by way, is it authentic or not. Then we see the level of weakness. Do they give strength to each other or they don't? or are they maybe authentic one, then that it serves that it as a basis. So the first thing is to critique the level of hadith and what have been reported. Then after we come back then to how to understand those reports. So, because sometimes a person might discuss a matter but haven't looked at the full picture. As we said that sometimes in the books, like for example the books of fiqh, that I may discuss a matter but it is somewhat give you a general idea, but sometimes not all the full details of all the hadiths. They may mention one or two hadith. In this case, we have gone through how many? 3 hadiths from 3 different companions. You understand? So you see what all have been mentioned upon the Prophet of Islam regarding this matter. Then we'll come up now with that. Then after we can come up with a final conclusion. And it's because the important matter regarding, and we said in our case for the past couple of years, we've experienced this a few years now. You understand? So we experienced a few years. So what really to be done? Then that will first, the 4th hadith on this matter. The 4th hadith. So they mentioned that hadith, a person called Sa'id ibn Rashid, Simak. So in that narration of Ibn Umar, the second narration, so it said that Ibn Umar have more than one narration, not just one, he have more than one narration, but they're similar. So that hadith also, it is that hadith that the ulama mentioned regarding the fiqh, Sa'id ibn Rashid as-Simak, and he said by Bukhari, Munkar hadith. Munkar hadith. And as mentioned by Abu Hatim al-Razi in his book, Jar wa Ta'dil, Da'if al-Hadith, Munkar al-Hadith. He is weak, and also his inner hadith are Munkar. And also Nasai rahimahullah mentioned Matruk. He's like, you understand, so that shows severe weakness. A narrator who said to be Matruk, then that only shows severe weakness. The 4th hadith, so that hadith of Ibn Umar, it have severe weakness. In the Isnad. We're talking about the Isnad. Hadith al-Rabi', that the hadith al-Rabi' is mentioned, the hadith mentioned, that hadith in the Ashafi in his book Al-Musnad, that's attributed to him, and also in his book Al-Umm, by Imam Shafi rahimahullah ta'ala, ومن طريقه بيهقي في الكبير والمعرفة السنة الأثار. البيهقي mentions the isnad go and Ibrahim ibn Muhammad قال حدثنا إبراهيم ibn عقبة and Umar ibn Abdul Aziz قال. So this narration go back to Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, now from the أتباع التابعين. اجتمع إيدان, that 2 Eid fall together. على أحد رسول الله عليه السلام أحد النبي عليه السلام upon in during the time of the Prophet عليه السلام. فقال, then the Prophet عليه السلام, he mentioned من أحب أن يجلس من أهل عالية فليجلس في غير حرج. So the Prophet عليه السلام mentioned regarding that Umar Abdul Aziz. So Umar Abdul Aziz is not a Sahaba, he's from the Tabi'een. So it's impossible for him to narrate that direct upon the Prophet عليه السلام. So in that he cleared it up in Qita. That's Mursal in Qita. So it mentioned regarding concerning the hadith of a broken isnad, is a broken chain. They mentioned that ijtama'idan, they mentioned that both E's were combined during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. فقال, and the Prophet ﷺ he addressed by saying, من أحب أن يجلس, that the one who wished to sit, من أهل العالية, then فليجلس, he can sit, من أهل العالية, the people who are from the outer town, the people who live like in the outskirts. So they're not from the people in the city, they're the people on the outskirts, that in the towns and the villages. If those people from the village, if they wish to stay and remain, they can do so without any problem for them. So that if they wish not to, they can go. So I can start giving some concession regarding the people who are from outside the city. If they wish to remain, they can do so. But also what is understood, mafhum mukhalafa, that if they wish to go, they can leave. Clear? So as for the narration, I mentioned that hadith. Also, أخرجه في رياضي في أحكام العيدين. Where another narration, it mentioned that same thing of Umar Abdul Aziz, that he mentioned, فقال فقد وافق هذا عهد رسول عليه السلام فقال عليه السلام من كان من أهل العالية. The Prophet mentioned the people from outside, from the outskirts, outside of town. that the people from amongst them, فَمَنْ أَحَبْ أَنْ يَشْهَدْ الْجُمَّةِ فَلْيَشْهَدْ, those who wish to wait and be witness to Jumu'ah, they can do so. وَمَنْ قَعَدَ, and those who wish to sit, قَعَدَ مِنْ غَيْرِ حَاجَةٍ, if they wish to sit, they can, or قَعَدَ مِنَةً, if they wish to go back, then they can do so. They wish to remain, they can do so. They mentioned that, but we said that narration on Umar Abdul Aziz upon the Prophet of Islam, mursal. So all those narrations are mursal. Nam, so I show that there's a breakage in the isnad. There's a breakage in the isnad. That's the hadith of Umar ibn Abdul Aziz. That's the fourth hadith, but also that is weak. So it's a mursal, meaning it is weak. The next fifth hadith in the Abdul Razak في مصنف عن ابن جريج قال أخبرني بعض أهل المدينة, that Ibn Jurayj, he mentioned that I've been informed by some of the people of Medina. And غير واحد منهم, from multiple people, not just one, from more than one person. So from multiple people. أن النبي عليه السلام, and the Prophet عليه السلام, اجتمع في زمانه يوم الجمعة ويوم الفطر, that during the time of the Prophet عليه السلام, so during the days of the Prophet عليه السلام, that both يوم الجمعة and Eid al-Fitr coincide on the same day. أو يوم الجمعة وأضحى, or يوم الجمعة and Adha, one of them, either Fitr wal Jumu'ah or Adha wal Jumu'ah. فصلى بالناس عيد الأول, then he prayed with them عيد الأول, which Eid al-Awwal will be what? Eid al-Fitr or Adha. ثم خطب فأذن للأنصار في رجوع إلى عوالي, then he mentioned that he gave permission, أذن للأنصار, that he gave permission for the people of the Ansar for them to go back to the awali, to go back, the people from out of town to go back. وترك الجمعة, and for them not to pray Jumu'ah, for them to leave Jumu'ah. ولم يزل الأمر على ذلك بعد, and the matter remained like that even after the Prophet of Islam, after him. So from that narration it mentioned what is the shahid, that Eid al-Fitr or Eid al-Adha coincide on the same day. Then the Prophet of Islam, that he mentioned that he prayed Salatul Eid, then he addressed the people by telling them that for those people who live out of town, the people from out of town, that you can go back and leave Jummah and don't pray Jummah, don't wait for Jummah, leave and don't pray Jummah. And he then mentioned that, and that was how things were since then until now.
So the Prophet he prayed Eid and the Jummah. He prayed both of them, but he just told, basically what I'm getting is that
He told others not to. They have a choice.
yeah, but he prayed.
Hey, we'll come. So we discussed after the Masail. So we discussed the hadith. After the Masail will come. So I said, as for the hadith that they mentioned here, that they mentioned that the hadith is daif. From the, as I said, from what is mentioned. We mentioned that قال ابن جريج قال أخبرني بعض أهل مدينة. From the fact that they mentioned Al Medina and didn't specify who they are, then I consider then that is called iham. He didn't specify. So for the isnad to be muttasil of one, it have to mention the person that you heard from and by name. I heard from such and such person. That is muttasil. So muttasil, that require that the person heard from the person who is his teacher, but also he has to name that person. He has to name the person. So he didn't give name of anyone, so it is left as ibham. It is mentioned as ibham. He hasn't mentioned specify anyone, so it's considered to be like an unacceptable narration. It's considered to be a reason for the hadith to be classed as daif. So they mentioned that this hadith is daif. Ibham, shuyukh ibn Jurayj. How we don't know who the actual shuyukh of Ibn Jurayj to say, are those people trustworthy or not? We can't measure them and critique them. So the hadith is considered to be daif. From the tabi'een. Then they mention regarding the sixth hadith on this, and this is the last, the hadith of Nu'man and Nu'man ibn Bashir رضي عنه قال كان رسول الله عليه السلام يقرأ في العيدين وفي الجمعة سبح اسم ربك الأعلى وألهتك حديث الغاشية وقال إذا اجتمع وتشاهد إذا اجتمع Eid wal Jumu'ah. The Prophet mentioned that if Eid and Jumu'ah coincide on the same day في يوم واحد, in the same day, يقرأ بهما أيضا في صلاتيه. or Salatain, fi as-Salatain. So he mentioned that if Eid and Jumu'ah coincide on the same day, then he will read both those two surah in both those two salah, meaning Salatul Eid and Salat al-Jumu'ah. Nam. So they mentioned hadith in Sahih Muslim, but that doesn't, that about what is to be read. That about what to be read, and can indicate that they prayed both salah. That's all I can give it that they pray both Eid and Jumu'ah. So those are the more, the first 5 more explicit regarding what we are discussing. I would say the hadith, the last one in the Sahih Muslim, but it's not per se that discussed our matter in to some degree that they did pray Eid and Jumu'ah, that they prayed Eid and Jumu'ah. Sahih Muslim, a hadith to Sahih. Let's say Sahih Muslim, then usually indicate Sahih. So those are the hadith. So from the hadith regarding this matter, we mentioned 6 hadith. So we have the first hadith of Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan and Zayd ibn Arqam. That hadith is da'if. The second hadith of Abu Hurairah, that one is da'if. The third hadith of Ibn Umar, with his different narration, it is da'if. Also we have the hadith of Ibn Jurayj. Then we have a hadith of Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, the narration of Umar Abdul Aziz. That one is also mursal. So that's then we have the fifth, that one of Ibn Jurayj, that also fihi daf, weakness. And also the sixth hadith with the hadith of Nu'man ibn Bashir. So all those 6 hadith is what? No, except for the hadith of Nu'man ibn Bashir. All the first 5 are that are very clear on the matter, they are weak. They are weak. So next step on the matter, they discuss the athar al-mawqufa, what been narrated upon the Sahaba on this matter. So they mentioned regarding concerning the first of those athar that have been narrated. They mentioned first regarding أخرج ابن أبي شيبة في مصنف قال ودي إسناد بإسناده يمنشن قال حدثنا أبو أسامة قال أبو أسامة عن هشام بن عروة عن وهب بن كيسان قال اجتمع وهب بن كيسان قال اجتمع عيدان في يوم, that both Eid, that they coincide on the same day. فخرج عبد الله ibn Zubair. So I mentioned that Abdullah ibn Zubair Sahabi. فصلى العيد بعدما ارتفع النهار, that Abdullah ibn Zubair, that he prayed Salatul Eid after the sun have risen. ثم دخل, then he entered. فلم يخرج حتى صلى عصر. He did not, so he went in and did not come out until he prayed Asr. So this narration upon Abdullah ibn Zubair. What occurred, as mentioned by Wahb ibn Kaysan, that both Eid coincide on the same day. Abdullah ibn Zubair, he came out, he prayed Salatul Eid after the sun have risen. ثم دخل, then he entered. فلم يخرج حتى صلى العصر. He did not come back out until he prayed Salatul Asr. قال هشام, then more narrator Hisham, he mentioned قال ذكرت ذلك لنافع, that I mentioned this to Nafi'. أو ذكر له, or it was mentioned to Nafi'. فقال يعني نافع قال ذكر ذلك لابن عمر, that was, it was mentioned that this was also mentioned to Ibn Umar. ولم ينكره, then Ibn Umar, when he heard this, he did not rebut this, he did not reject this, he did not criticize this. So it seems as if what Abdullah ibn Zubair did, that Ibn Umar also agreed with him, because he did not refuted what he did or rejected what he did. So he mentions also the narration of Ibn Umar of Abdullah ibn Zubair, that he prayed Salatul Eid. Then he entered his house, or enter wherever, and he did not come out from wherever he enters his house until Asr. So that's how the discussion, what happened to Jumu'ah and Dhuhr. What happened to Jumu'ah and Dhuhr? I mentioned ثم دخل, he entered. ولم يخرج حتى صلى عصر. He did not come back out until he prayed Asr. So what happened in between that time, which we time that there's no mention of Dhuhr, no mention of Juma. But then I mentioned this was mentioned to Ibn Umar, and Umar kind of somewhat agreed with him. He did not corrected or refuted what happened. I mentioned Mawquf Sahih. That is narration going back to Abdullah ibn Zubair. Mawquf Sahih. It is authentic. As I mentioned, Abu Usama wa Hammad ibn Usama ثقة, Hisham ibn Awra ثقة ثبت, ربما يدلس, but also have some tadlis. Wahb ibn Kaysan ثقة. So all the narrators are ثقة. The only person that is Hisham ibn Awra have some tadlis with him. But I mentioned that, and also this narration of many, this narration of Ibn Zubair of many different narrations, of different narration that's one is in Ibn Abi Shayba in his Musannif. Also something similar had been found by Ibn Abi Shayba. Also Nasa'i fi al-Mujtaba wal Kubra, Ibn Khuzaymah, Ibn Munzir, Hakim, that mentioned something similar, and Ibn Zubair, where I mentioned that something similar. And Wahb ibn Kaysan قال اجتمع عيدان في عهد Ibn Zubair, that both Eids were coincide during the time of Ibn Zubair. فأخر خروج, then he delayed in coming out. ثم خرج فخطب, then he came out and gave a khutbah. فأطال الخطبة, and he gave a very long khutbah. ثم صلى, then he prayed. ولم يخرج إلى جمعة, and didn't come out for Jumu'ah. فأبى ذلك أناس عليه, then the people that they ridicule him for this. The people that they ridicule him for this. فقال فبلغ ذلك عند ابن Abbas, this reached the attention of Ibn Abbas. فقال أصاب السنة, so it reached Ibn Abbas. قال أصاب السنة. فبلغ ابن زبير, then reached Ibn Zubair. فقال شهدت عيد مع العمر فصنع كما صنعت. That he mentioned that Ibn Zubair, that, you know, I witnessed Eid with Umar ibn Khattab, and I did as he did. That's Ibn Zubair. So they mentioned that that narration, that some discussion regarding the part regarding and Nasai mentioned that Shahidtu al-Eid mal Umar, some discussion regarding Ibn Umar, that Nasai didn't mention that part of the hadith or that athar, didn't mention that part. Well, Hakim, all concerned to know is Sahih. Hakim, all it to be Sahih. But I mentioned that this narration that is mentioned, that they mentioned that in the narration that it is mentioned that on the tariq of Abdul Hamid ibn Jafar al-Ansari, that he mentioned this narration, and Wahb ibn Kaysan. So Abdul Hamid, that I mentioned Ibn Jafar al-Ansari, in كان ثقة وثقه ابن معين إلا أن ابن أجر قال في تقريب صدوق ربما وهم. So even though, so the person who narrates upon Ibn Kaysan, that was Abdul Hamid, there's some discussion about him in brief, some discussion regarding him, as mentioned by An-Nasa'i. ليس بقوي, he's not qawi. And also that Ibn Hibban also criticized him somewhat. Al-Dhahbi rahimahullah, he mentioned Abdul Hamid ibn Jafar al-Madani صدوق. قال أبو حاتم لا يتج به ضعفه يعني قهطان وفيه قدرية. So this narrator was Abdul Hamid ibn Jafar al-Ansari, that narrate upon Wahb ibn Kaysan, who narrate upon the author of Ibn Zubair, that I mentioned that this person who said it was Abdul Hamid ibn Jafar al-Ansari, that there's some discussion regarding him. There's some discussion regarding him. And you have other narration that are similar. You have a third narration on Ibn Zubair that I mentioned on Ata. Ata قال اجتمع يوم الجمعة ويوم الفطر على أحد ابن Zubair, that يوم الجمعة coincide with يوم الفطر during the time of Ibn Zubair. فقال عيدان اجتمعا في يوم الواحد, that both Eids that are done fall on the same day. فجمعناهما جميعا, so we combine both together. فصلىهما ركعتين bakran, that bakra, that he prayed both of them early. وَلَمْ يَزِدْ عَلَيْهِمَا حَتَّى صَلَّى عَصْرًا. So they mentioned that he prayed both of them, and then he did not, meaning together, Eid prayed, and he did not pray anything until Asr. Meaning that, indicating that he missed. وَلَمْ يَزِدْ did not increase anything until he prayed Salatul Asr, meaning that he missed Jumu'ah and / Dhuhr. That narration, meaning he missed Jumu'ah, did not pray Eid, and that suffice for Jumu'ah. Then he did not pray until Asr. He did not pray until Asr. Then I mentioned regarding concerning Ata ibn Abi Rabah, ثقة لكن اختلط بآخره, that he is a person that Ibn Abi or Ata ibn Rabah, that is thicker, but then he can somewhat become, when you start to lose your mind, what do they call that in English? Dementia. A form of dementia. They call it's a اختلط. So it's in the latter part of his night, and somewhat, things that about, his mind wasn't function as it would. So he can somewhat, you have that matter. Then they mention An-Nawawi rahimahullah, when he mentioned An-Nawawi rahimahullah in his book Tahdhib al-Asma wal-Lughat. That book is in print. He called that he mentioned in this book, he'll have a tarajim of individual. He mentioned Ata ibn Abi Rabah. So An-Nawawi rahimahullah in his book Tahdhib al-Asma wal-Lughat, when he mentioned Ata ibn Abi Rabah, قال ومن غرائبه, of the thing which is strange regarding him, ما أكا عنه ibn Munzir وغيره, that what have been mentioned regarding Ata, which is something which is strange, that they mentioned by Ibn Munzir and others, أنه قال, that Ata ibn Rabah قال إذا كان عيد يوم الجمعة وجبت صلاة العيد, that if Eid and Jumu'ah is on the same day, wajabat, it is compulsory to pray Salatul Eid. ولا يجب, and not compulsory, بعدها لا جمعة ولا ظهر, it is not compulsory to pray Jumu'ah nor Dhuhr. ولا صلاة بعد العيد إلا أصر, and there is no salat to be prayed until Asr. But An-Nawawi rahimahullah says, of those things that qaraibi, of the thing which is strange from him, of those positions that he ought to be strange, that is mentioned regarding Ata ibn Abi Rabah, regarding this position that he took, that if Eid and Jumu'ah coincide, you pray Eid. He mentioned yajib Salatul Eid, you must pray Salatul Eid. ولا يجب is not compulsory, could be mustahab, means لا يجب بعدها, not after it, لا جمعة ولا ظهر, so that day you miss don't pray Jumu'ah and you don't pray Dhuhr. And he mentioned even to clarify that ولا صلاة بعد العيد إلا عصر, and there's no salat after Eid until Salatul Asr. So Jumu'ah and Dhuhr is out. Then I mentioned وفي إسناد عبد الملك ibn جريج وهو مدلس لم يصر بالتحديد. So you have some discussion regarding also that this matter. So you have some discussion regarding an Ata أنه لم يسمع من something regarding Ibn Jurayj. So that matter, you have some discussion regarding also that athar on that matter. And next narration that is mentioned here, I mentioned that قال أبو داود رحمه الله ومن طريقه ضياء يعني المقدسي في كتابه المختارة, ويمنشن قال حدثنا محمد بن طريف بجلي قال حدثنا أصبات عن عامش عن عطاء بن أبي رباح قال صلى بنا ابن زبير في يوم العيد في يوم الجمعة أول نهار. So they mentioned that this narration that they mentioned Ata ibn Abi Rabah قال that Ibn Zubair, he prayed with us on a day that Eid and Jumu'ah coincide in the early parts of the morning. ثم رحنا إلى الجمعة. Then he mentioned ثم رحنا إلى الجمعة, then after we went for Jumu'ah. ولم يخرج إلينا, then he did not come out to us. فصلى وحدانا, and we prayed individually. وكان ابن عباس بالطائف, Ibn Abbas was in Taif. فلما قدم ذكرنا ذلك له, when Ibn Abbas he came, then we mentioned this thing. فقال أصاب السنة, that what have been done is according to the sunnah. Go back to one of the hadith of Ibn Zubair, the one that we mentioned as the first one of the hadith that we mentioned regarding Ibn Zubair, regarding that in some narration it mentioned that قال اجتمع إيدان في عهد Ibn Zubair, that both Eids were combined in the time of Ibn Zubair. فأخر الخروج, he came out late. ثم خرج فخطب, then he came out and he prayed. فأطال الخطبة ثم صلى, then I mentioned that he made the khutbah long. ثم said, then he prayed after. ولم يخرج إلى الجمعة, and he did not come out for Jumu'ah. فأبى ذلك, and أناس عليه, and some of the people that they criticized him for this. Then I mentioned that it reached Ibn Abbas. فقال أصاب السنة. In this narration I mentioned concerning that Ibn Zubair, what he did first. قال ثم خرج فخطب, he came out and he gave a khutbah. فأطال الخطبة, and he gave a long khutbah. ثم صلى, that's not Salatul Eid. So, because Salatul Eid is Salat, then the khutbah. With that description, then that is Salatul Jummah. So, if one says فقال, and then that's no, اجتمع عيدان, the narration of Ibn Kaysan, of those narration Ibn Zubair. اجتمع عيدان في عهد ابن زبير فأخر خروج, he came out late or later on. ثم خرج فخطب فأطال الخطبة ثم صلى. So خطب وأطال الخطبة وصلى, that sequence it is Jummah, not Salatul Eid. That I mentioned فلم يخرج إلى الجمعة, he did not come out for Jummah. So, you understand what happened? Did he change the format of Eid by giving the A? So something, you understand, seems, I mentioned, وَلَمْ يَخْرُجْ إِلَىٰ الْجُمَّةِ, he didn't come out for Jummah. So what did he pray then? So, as with Eid, you have the Salat, then the khutbah. But in this case, he prayed, he did the khutbah, then the Salah. So, even though we find some of the khulafa that came later that they tried to change the format. So, that's concerning that athar. I will mention about. So, that's concerning that discussion. Then the next athar they mention, and Ubayd, and Abi Ubayd مولى ابن أزهر قال شهدت العيد مال عثمان ibn Affan. So they mention that in this case regarding Uthman ibn Affan. فكان ذلك يوم الجمعة, and this was يوم الجمعة. فصلى قبل خطبة, and he prayed before the khutbah. ثم خطب, then he gave the khutbah. فقال يا أيها الناس, O people, إن هذا يوم قد اجتمع لكم فيه عيدان, that O people, on this day that two of the Eid have fall on this particular day of yours. فمن أحب أن ينتظر الجمعة من آل الأوالي فلينتظر, and those who wish to wait, those who love to wait, or those who desire to wait until Jummah from the people of the outskirts, فلينتظر, then you can wait. ومن أحب أن يرجع فقد أذنت له, and those people wish to go back, or the people of the outskirts, you can go back, I give you permission. That's from Uthman. So Uthman is that sense that now some of the people that from the outskirts, they can go back home and not wait for Jummah. If they wish they can, and if they wish they can go home and they can miss Jummah. Then I mentioned that that also Athar Uthman is mawquf, that mentioned Imam Malik and Tahawi fi Shar Mushkil al-Athar, Ibn Hibban, Al-Bayhaqi fi al-Khubra, wa ma fi al-Sunan wal-Athar, والبيهقي في الكبير, and others who have mentioned regarding Abdul Razak, that they mentioned all the narration that Athar on Uthman is authentic. That Athar on Uthman, that Uthman gave permission for the people who are from the outskirts that they can either pray and wait for Jumu'ah, or they can leave and miss Jumu'ah after praying Salatul Eid. The third Athar that we have goes back to Ibn Abi Shayba. So Ibn Abi Shayba رحمه الله في مصنف وفي ريابي في أحكام العيدين قال من طريق جعفر بن محمد عن أبيه قال اجتمع. So Jafar ibn Muhammad and أبيه, who is Muhammad. So his father is Muhammad ibn Ali ibn Hussein ibn Ali ibn Abi Talib. That will be like the grandson of Ali. قال اجتمع عيدان على عهد علي. That this after about Ali, what occurred during the time that both Eids that fell on the same day during the time of Ali ibn Abi Talib. فشهد بهم Eid. Then he participated with them Salatul Eid. ثم قال, then Ali, he said to the people, إننا مجمعون, that we would be gathering. فمن أراد أن يشهد فليشهد, and those who wish to bear witness, meaning attend, you can, meaning مجمعون يعني Salatul Eid, Salatul Jumu'ah, that we'll be praying Salatul Jumu'ah. Those who wish to be there, you can. So can I mention فمن أراد, those who wish, and يشهد فليشهد, those who wish to do so, then they can. So can somebody give some leniency that it is that people who wish to remain, they can, and those who wish not to, they don't have to. Then I mentioned that with this narration that there's inqita regarding concerning that who's Abi Jafar al-Baqir Muhammad ibn Ali ibn Hussein ibn Abi Talib wa bin Abi Talib. So between those that there's an inqita, there's a breakage in the isnad. Now there's a breakage in the isnad. So between Ali and Baqir, and between Ali and Baqir, who's Abi Jafar Muhammad ibn Ali ibn Hussein ibn Ali ibn Abi Talib, that there's a breakage in the isnad. Now so both didn't meet and relate hadith together, as mentioned by Abu Hatim Ibn Abi Hatim in his book Marasil. قال Abu Zurha Muhammad ibn Ali ibn Hussein and Ali Mursal, that Muhammad ibn Ali ibn Hussein and Ali ibn Abi Talib, those hadith, it is not connected, it is disconnected. And also At-Tirmidhi rahimahullah قال Abu Jafar Muhammad ibn Ali ibn Hussein lam yudrik Ali ibn Abi Talib. So both of them never meet. So in narrating upon Ali, then that shows that there's a inqita, there's a breakage in the isnad. So that isnad of Ali, that incident of Ali, it is daif. It is daif. And you have other isnad, but they are also similarly daif. That Jafar ibn Muhammad narrate upon Ali, that those narrations, that Baqir, that they are daif. So what narrate upon Ali, then you have one daf, inqita, so those are what have been mentioned, are some of the athar regarding concerning this particular matter, regarding what have been mentioned regarding this. And there's a fourth athar, that I mentioned regarding concerning narration that goes back to that قال حدثنا أبو عوانة, or mentioned concerning that narration concerning أخرجه في ريابي في أحكام العيدين. قال حدثنا قتيبة قال حدثنا أبو عوانة عن قتادة عن حسن قال اجتمع عيدان على عهد علي, that both Eids combined on the same day during the time of Ali ibn Abi Talib. فصلى أحدهما, so he prayed one of them, ولم يصلي آخر, and did not pray the other. So they mentioned that this isnad that regarding mentioned that قال حدثنا قتيبة قال حدثنا أبو عوانة عن قتادة عن Hassan here, Hassan al-Basri. And Hassan al-Basri did not meet Ali ibn Abi Talib. Hassan al-Basri did not meet Ali ibn Abi Talib. And also they mention other illah. So from this, then so let's concern the athar wal ahadith regarding this discussion to what we have mentioned. So we mentioned ahadith. So said all the hadith, we mentioned 6 hadith. We mentioned hadith of, again, in the hadith that we have mentioned, we mentioned first the hadith of Muawiyah ibn Sufyan, we say it is da'if. Second, the hadith of Abu Hurairah, that one also da'if. We mentioned the hadith of Ibn Umar, also da'if. Then we mentioned the case of Abdul Aziz, Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, also that is da'if. Then we mentioned the fifth with the hadith of Ibn Jurayj, that mentioned regarding that also mentioned that one is also da'if. Then we mentioned the hadith of An-Nu'man ibn Bashir, we said that one is authentic, but didn't discuss explicit on our discussion. Then we mentioned, as for the athar, we mentioned one, that of Abdullah ibn Zubair. That one is several, that they are authentic, Mawquf Sahih, and Ibn Zubair. Also, we mentioned one and Uthman. We said that also one is authentic. We mentioned an Ali ibn Abi Talib, da'if. And we mentioned also the one another, an Ali ibn Abi Talib, the second on Hassan, that also da'if. So what we have are authentic, that is authentic, goes back to all mawquf, an Ali, Ansari Uthman, and Ibn Zubair. So based upon this, so there's no authentic hadith that goes back to the Prophet Islam that on this matter. Some of the ulama made authentically based, as I said, that they see all of them combined together give strength. Now that becomes a next discussion regarding how to apply a hadith of that nature and cases when all the hadith is da'if, when can they, if they are all put together, how they give strength. That's the next discussion, right? So you might find those who authenticate a hadith, it may be based upon that basis. It may be based upon that basis. But overall, all the narration that there, fi maqal, there's some discussion regarding their authenticity.
Even the two.
Which two?
You said we mentioned 6 of these, right?
It was the hadith. So all the hadith we say, we said the first 5 are all weak.
Except 2.
Those are the athar upon the Sahaba.
Okay. So of the authentic narrations that we have, what would you say is the best decision to take, as we know that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he prayed Eid and he prayed Jumu'ah, but you still get some ulama that say basically.
I want to discuss the aqwal of the ulama now. The second step is discuss the aqwal of the ulama. So say that first, know what are the evidence that are there, what have been narrated by transmission or by narration, and we can have some have an idea what have been reported on that topic. And we have gone through critique the hadith to some degree. Not that what I say is correct, but totally understand. But that's of the discussion. You understand? So we have an idea as to what is being put forward regarding the hadith, regarding what discuss specifically this discussion. You understand? So we can say because all the hadith that it may have occurred, but all the hadith indicate that certain details of do you miss Jumu'ah or not is not explicitly clear because all the hadith are questionable. You understand? But we said the hadith that in Sahih Muslim indicates no, it did occur, but it didn't explain exactly what happened. Did the Prophet Islam prayed Eid then Jumu'ah? Or did the Prophet Islam prayed Eid without Jumu'ah? Did the Prophet Islam prayed Eid and didn't pray Dhuhr and prayed Asr? You understand? No, that becomes the area of the thing now. We have no clear text on this. You with me? So that's the discussion. To see what all the ulama now, how they understand and come to a certain conclusion. So I said, but with the Sahaba of what we said can say authentic, we have an Ibn Zubair, Abdullah ibn Zubair and Uthman, that they gave some leniency for some people to miss Jumu'ah. They gave some leniency for people to miss Jumu'ah. Clear? So on this now, see what is said by the aqwal of the ulama. The aqwal of the ulama. Some said no, that this approach that we're using is a method that is said that to find that, like in some of the books of or some of the ulama of hadith, the method that they apply regarding discussing, for example, a specific case. When this is a particular, for example, this, first they'll mention all the hadith wal athar and critique them, then they mention after the aqwal of the ulama on the matter. But first, the person understand what's been mentioned regarding narration upon the Prophet Islam, upon the Sahaba regarding how they, what have been reported. So, by way of the aqwal of the ulama, they mention arba aqwal. So find that each group would take something from those hadith. Now, in their own way. The aqwal of the ulama, first of the madhab al-ulama, that first, أن الجمعة, so the first opinion of the ulama, أن الجمعة تسقط عن جميع من صلى عيد سواء من أهل الحضر أو أهل البادية يصلون ويصلون الظهر. That's the first opinion. So the first meaning, أن الجمعة, that Jumu'ah تسقط, it is missed. Or what's another word for maybe تسقط? It is forfeited. It has been alleviated. So you pray Eid, then you are not obliged to attend Jumu'ah. And this applies to whether the person is al-hadar, the people in the city, or badiya, or the people on the outskirts, in the outside the city. But they pray dhuhr. So you pray Eid, you can miss, if you want, Jumu'ah, whether you're the people who are of the city or outside the city. But you pray dhuhr. So those who miss Jumu'ah, pray Eid, they choose to miss Jumu'ah, then they still pray dhuhr. And they go along, whether you're from the people in the city or you're outside the city. That's the first opinion. Clear? And that's the matter of Hanabila. That's the position taken by the Hanabila. Now, say mentioned, for example, Ibn Qudama can somewhat mention, he mentioned, Ibn Qudama, that ittafaq, Ibn Qudama rahimahullah mentioned, إذا اتفق Eid في يوم الجمعة, if Eid and يوم الجمعة coincide, فصلوا Eid, you pray Eid. So for them, you pray Eid. وَلَمْ تَلْزِمْهُمْ الْجُمَعة, it is not compulsory upon you to attend Jumu'ah. وَيَصَلُّونَ ظُهُرْ, and you pray dhuhr though. So they see it as it's not compulsory for you to, you can miss Jumu'ah, but you still pray dhuhr. You still pray dhuhr, you cannot miss dhuhr. But you have an option for Jumu'ah. And I mentioned that, this is the Prophet mentioned, مَنْ شَاءَ أَنْ يُجَمَّعْ فَلْيُجَمَّعْ, those who wish to pray, you can, as he mentioned, وَمَنْ أَجْزَهُ مِنَ الْجُمَّةِ, that so he meant the hadith I mentioned, the Prophet gives some concession for you to miss Jumu'ah, then they use those hadiths. They use those hadiths. Amongst them also they add to that view, tajib Jumu'ah ala imam. So the ones who after this view I mentioned though, tajib Jumu'ah ala imam, that the imam, he has to still establish Jumu'ah in the masjid. So even though they owe that, the general people have an option to attend or not, but the masjid should, and the imam should have Jumu'ah. He should have Jumu'ah. As I mentioned, the Prophet mentioned, innana mujammi'un, that we are gathered, meaning that we're going to gather for Jumu'ah. And he was also the imam. So the masjid should still perform Jumu'ah according to this view. Then also they add of that view also, la tajib, that means la tajib is not compulsory for the imam to have Jumu'ah, or for the imam to perform Jumu'ah. So you have two views regarding the imam, those who say yes, he's still to do so, and those who mention is not yajib, it's not compulsory, but can be done. Then Ibn Zubayr mentioned that Ibn Zubayr, as I mentioned, lam yusalliha wa kana imam, that Ibn Zubayr was the imam, the Khalifa then, of the Khalifa, but they mentioned that he entered and did not come out until Asr. That's Ibn Zubayr says, that he, the imam, did not pray he prayed Eid, but did not, and still being the Imam called that time, the Imam of the head of state or the governor, they will pray Eid and they will pray Jumu'ah and lead the people. So he led them in Eid, but did not come out to lead them in Jumu'ah, and he came out for Asr. So they mention that if Jumu'ah sakata an Imam, then also sakata an the Ma'mun, then also sakata, then if it is relieved of by the Imam, by those who are the general people, and also the Imam, also it is relieved from him. That's the first opinion. The second opinion on the matter, أن الجمعة تسقط أمن كانت منازلهم خارجا عن المدينة. So the second view that they mentioned that as for Jumu'ah, that it is relieved, forfeited by those who كانت منازلهم, that those people that their residence is خارج عن المدينة, from the city. So those people living outside the city, that because they came in for Eid, then I mentioned that as for those people, Jumu'ah sakata anhum, that they don't have to pray for Jumu'ah for the people who are outside the city. Duna ghayrihim, other than him, but the people who are of the city, min al amsar, tajib alayhim Jumu'ah. So for the people who live in the city, they have to pray Jumu'ah, but the people who live outside the city, they don't have to attend Jumu'ah. So they make a difference between that. Jumu'ah is still to be prayed, still wajib, but for those who are the people who are in the city folks, as for the person who live outside the city, the outskirts, then Jumu'ah is not compulsory upon them. They have a leniency for them and them only. That's the second view. And of those who take this view, is the madhab of the Hanafiya, Shafi'iyya, Qawl al-Malik, وهو مذهب جمهور العلماء. That doesn't take by the method of the madhab al-arba, Hanafiya, Shafi'iyya, Qawl al-Malik, a view on Imam Malik, and also the position taken by Jumhur, many of the majority of the ulama.
Not the Hanabala.
And we mentioned Hanabala separate. We mentioned them separate, so they are not a part of Jumhur in this one. Nam? They are there, so they are by themselves. On this, so they have taken the first opinion. Then the second opinion instead is Jumhur, which is that Jumu'ah is still wajib on the people who live in the city, and also Eid for them. So for the second Jumhur of the ulama majority, which is the Hanafi, the Shafi, and Imam Malik, that Eid is compulsory upon everyone, city and outsiders, to participate in Eid. Also for the people who live in the city, you still have to attend Jumu'ah. But they give a concession for the people who live outside the city, that you don't have to pray Jumu'ah. That's the distinction with them. They said, they said, of those who take the position, Uthman ibn Affan, Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, Ibn Munzir, wa Ibn Abdul Bar, of the ulama and the Sahaba. And Imam Shafi rahimahullah mentioned in the book Al-Um this particular view. So I mentioned Mawardi al-Shafi'i, one of the ulama of the Shafi'ah. Mawardi, he mentioned that he has a book called Hawi al-Kabir, a book, important book in the fiqh Shafi'i mentioned, إذا كان عيد في يوم الجمعة فعلى أهل مصر أن يصلي الجمعة ولا يجوز لهم تركها. That he mentioned that Mawardi, according to Aziz Shafi'i, that opinion of the Shafi'i that if Eid and Jumu'ah coincide on the same day, then for the people who live in the city dwellers, then they have to pray Jumu'ah. So Eid, but also they have to pray Jumu'ah. I mentioned ولا يجوز لهم تركها, that it is not allowed for them to miss Jumu'ah. Nam فقام قال به أكثر أصحابنا وفقهاء كافة. Then I mentioned that the position taken by majority of the Shafi and also other of the ulama. So they mentioned that the general hadith I mentioned, Jumu'ah being compulsory, that still stands. They said that the general hadith that relates to Jumu'ah still applies to the people who live in the city, even though Eid was of the same day, coincide on the same day. Jumu'ah still stands and its ahkam still stands. I mentioned that they see it as لأن العيد sunnah. They see Eid among the Shafi'iyah that Eid, the hukum of Eid, it is sunnah. Mu'akkada or sunnah, but it is sunnah for them, not wajib. So I said Eid Salat, by way of ruling, it is sunnah, mustahab, wal Jumu'ah fard. They see Eid Salat as sunnah and Jumu'ah as fard. So they mentioned that وَلَا يَجُوز تَرْكَ الْفَرْد بِالسُّنَّةِ. That is not allowed for a person to miss a fard, put a fard over that of something which is sunnah, that over that which is something which is compulsory. So they said no, in that case, Jumu'ah still remain fard and still to be done. Is for Eid for them, it is sunnah. So they mentioned أنها واجب عليهم, that Eid is still wajib كأهل Ansar. So that's concerning. So that's concerning. So they mentioned that Eid is still wajib. Then amongst the Shafi'iyah, they have a discussion regarding the people who live in the outskirts. The people said, so the people who live in the city, it's compulsory for them to still attend Salatul Jumu'ah. Now, as for the people who live in the outskirts, now they disagree regarding that. Some old concerns, the people who live in the outskirts outside the city, also Jumu'ah is wajib, and those mentioned is not wajib. So you have that two aqwal between them on the people outside the city. But that's the second opinion. So they said the second opinion, I mentioned that Ibn Zubair and Uthman, that they gave concession to the people who live outside, al-awali. Their narration was more targeted to the people who live outside the city. So they said no, that where Uthman and Ibn Zubair give, more so Uthman, that they give a rukhsa for the people who live outside the city, not for so the people who live. And also they mentioned some narration of the Prophet ﷺ mentioned regarding concerning that وفي مثل هذا اليوم فقد اجتمع فيه يومكم هذا عيدان فمن شاء أن ينصرف فلينصرف إن مجمعون. So that's not, that applies regarding that. That was in regards to that was in relation to the people, or that was addressing people al-awali, the people live in the outskirts. But I mentioned that if those who wish to go, you can go. He was talking about the people who live outside the city. In those cases of. As for the third aqwal on this matter, أن الجمعة لا تسقط, that Jumu'ah, it still stands. وتجب على كل أحد ممن شهد العيد حتى أهل الأوالي, that Jumu'ah still compulsory upon everyone. Those who, the outskirts and those of the city folks. So for them, Jumu'ah still remain wajib, even with Eid, for everyone. No exception for them. So they mentioned that of those who take this view, Imam Malik, so Imam Malik, Qawl and Imam Malik, another view on Imam Malik, and a wedge in the Shafi as view of the views of some of the ulama of the Shafi'iyah, and also Madhab al-Zahiriyah, and the Zahiriyah is of this opinion, that Jumu'ah and Eid is still a must to be prayed. But more so, Jumu'ah still must be prayed by all. So whoever attend Eid, it's still upon them to attend Jumu'ah. Whether you come from outside or outside the city, or you are from within the city. So that's concerning the view taken by them. And they all concerned all the hadith about those things upon the Prophet Islam, they're daif. So everything go back to the asl, which is Jumu'ah still remain wajib upon those that it is compulsory upon them. That Ibn Hazm rahimahullah, he mentioned إذا اجتمع عيد في يوم الجمعة صلوا للعيد ثم للجمعة ولا بد ولا يسع الأثر بخلاف ذلك. So he mentioned Ibn Hazm rahimahullah, that the person is still pray Eid and Jumu'ah together. Both are still, and that and there's nothing that is authentic upon the Prophet of Islam regarding that matter. So he mentioned you still pray with Eid also al-Jumu'ah. It remains as it is. Then the fourth opinion is أن الصلاة العيد, that Salatul Eid تسقط الجمعة والظهر. So the fourth opinion, that the one who prays Salatul Eid, that if it coincides with Yawmul Jumu'ah, then if you pray Eid, then you miss Jumu'ah and Dhuhr. So the person in this case, according to this view, that the person that who prays, if it was a coincide on that day, Eid and Jumu'ah, you pray Eid, that suffice you until Salatul Asr. You don't pray until Salatul Asr. So you miss Jumu'ah, and also you do not pray, you miss Dhuhr. You miss Jumu'ah and Dhuhr. That they mention regarding concerns and Jamia man shahidaha. Anyone who perform Eid, then you have a right to miss Jumu'ah and Dhuhr. That they mention سواء من أهل البلد أو من أهل البادية, whether from the people of the city or outside the city. That's their view. وهو قول عطاء. So I mentioned that it's the قول of Ata, as mentioned by Nawrah, that's of his strange opinion. وعبد الرزاق وروي عن Ali, and also a narration on Ali was Zubair and Zubair. So those are the ones who have this view of this particular view. It is mentioned by some of the ulama consider أما الفقهاء ولم يقول بذلك. That the fuqaha, they don't take this view. But this view, you can understand a contention regarding this view. Yes, and the ulama, that some contention regarding this view. Qala Ibn Abdul Bar, هذا قول mahjur. This qawl is somewhat abandoned. Qawl is dismissed. Regarding that a person who prays Salatul Eid, he missed Jumu'ah and Dhuhr. Nam. لأن المسألة قال لأن الله تعالى افترض الصلاة الجمعة في يوم الجمعة على كل من قال من في الأمصار من بالغين الذكور الأحرار. So he mentioned that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may compose Salatul Jumu'ah on people of the city, and they are of puberty and male free persons. So that's concerning aqwal of the ulama on that matter. So you have 4 aqwal of the ulama on this particular matter. That conclusion, qawl rajah. Qawl rajah. Allahu alam, that according to the, you understand, of those who mentioned, that still, that the more predominant view is still a qawl, that qawl of jumhur of the ulama. What's qawl of jumhur of the ulama, we said? Hey, so that's still the predominant view. Hey, except for Al-Awad, they give based upon Uthman, they give like a concession for the people who live outside the city. In today's time, that you might find that, but that's the general view. So all the people live in the city. So for example, last Friday will occur. So all of us who prayed Eid, then we're supposed to return back and pray Jummah. Because we all live in the city. And locals. If you want to use the word, if we are locals, you understand? So even though you pray Eid, you return back to pray Jummah, except for those who, I'm not sure, who live where? In England now, where? Now, all those places are now cities now. You understand? Everywhere now is cities. And if you go to, you understand, some remote areas type of thing, then that's an exception maybe for them. But as for most of us, what we call cities and town today you find masajid everywhere now. Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah bil alameen. So most of it would not be exempt based upon the qawl of jumhur ulama. Based upon qawl of jumhur of the ulama, we will not be exempt. And if we pray Jummah, we're still obliged to. If we pray Eid, still obliged to pray Al-Jummah. That's qawl of jumhur of the ulama. So that inshallah ta'ala would us kind of somewhat. And they said, that most of the evidence regarding all other views somewhat, the hadith are weak regarding them. The hadith are weak regarding whatever may be used as evidence for the other views. With that, inshallah ta'ala, would end. وَبِاللَّهِ تَعَالَى تَوْفِيقُ وَهَدِيَ السَّبِيلِ.
So who wrote that?
It is a paper that is written that he mentioned. It says that Muhammad Taha Sha'ban, I think he's Misri. Allahu alam. But some of the Mashaykh from Misr kind of somewhat have a taqdeem to it, like an introduction to it. But a nice little bath on the topic. A nice little. What did I see? I have one, but I couldn't find it, or something else. Hey, one of the Mashaykh from, I think from Yemen. You have the, we call it, you have they put their like research paper, but you have like something on it, but when I tap to it, something else comes up, and I couldn't find it. Yeah, I think he did someone did something from Yemen, but on this topic. But when I tried to download, it was something else. It downloaded, but something else come up, a different research paper. So I'm not sure. And I would have to type it in. I still couldn't find it. But interesting discussion. But something I said for us to just take as note. If this was to occur, then what is the aqwal of the ulama on the matter? And what is upon us regarding which view we think is the most correct of the view? I've said Jumu'ah ulama, that their view still seem to be the stronger opinion. Still seem to be the stronger of their opinion based upon the evidence. Wabillahi ta'ala tawfiq. I know. I said that he had the view that is, of the view that I mentioned. His view will be of the view that I mentioned. Huh? No, not that view, something of that view. That the matter said that the matter with I think the views of Sheikh Albani that also yuskit al-dhuhr. Yeah, I think that's of the issue that I discussed. So in this case, the person, if he missed Jummah, so that's to clarify, we're still rolling. If the person missed Jummah, he prays dhuhr. You have a view that you understand that if I'm hopefully I'm incorrect, but the view of the Sheikh possibly from what I can, that you miss dhuhr and prayed asr based upon some of the narration of Ibn Zubair, if I'm not mistaken. So not to say about that's why I try not to mention the view of contemporaries when we have the view that are laid by the ulama before. You understand? Because sometimes people become muta'assib towards the view of the mu'asir. I don't know. Yeah, people are like that. You understand? So I said to know, but overall, that whatever view anyone of contemporary take will fall into one of the views of the ulama of the past. So no need to mention contemporary at times. But the view that may take the position that, as I said, that's not Ibn Abdul mentioned called the mahjura, that the person said that if you pray Eid, you don't pray Jumu'ah and don't pray Dhuhr, then that causes a bit, as some of the ulama see it as, a bit much. A bit much. So I said that's the discussion between the ulama. So I said even though, if a person said, he said attribute a view to one of the ulama of contemporary time, that said it's not that easy to know that he's trying to, he's doing it based upon his research. It's based upon his research. And the Prophet mentioned, إذا حكم الحاكم فاجتهد فله وأصاب فله أجران. If the person who is a mujtahid, an alim, that passed a judgment and is correct, he get 2 reward. فإذا حكم واجتهد وأخطأ فله أجر واحد. And if he did not got the right answer, he get 1 reward. So as I said, ulama, we give them excuse, that and still respect their view, but at times though we still have to review their views and check their views. So I said that's the basic discussion on this topic. Wabillahi ta'ala tawfiq.